Children Shouldn't Play with Dead Things is a early film. It had not one but two gay characters, although they're the first to get their asses eaten by zombies. There's a gay couple in Blackula. There are lesbians. There's a lesbian couple in The Sentinel, but they're evil because the author of the original novel was totally anti-queer, and his sequel novel to that movie and book was horridly homophobic. There's a gay theater critic in Theater of Blood, there better be, and Vincent Price, who was in that movie, goes campy gay for a few minutes. There's a gay main character in Rituals. We get a gay glam rocker in Phantom of the Paradise by De Palma, and also a trans killer in his Dress to Kill. And in Love Me Deadly, there's a gay hustler. He's out and proud, and he's actually horrified that everyone else is having sex with corpses. I know It Part 2 had a blatant gay bashing, but I would argue that many horror films that presented gay or trans people as killers are homophobic. Psycho, Homicidal, Hide and Go Shriek, The Fan with Lauren Bacall, Fear No Evil, Curse of the Queer Wolf, The Newly Deads with a drag queen bride zombie, Reflection of Fear, Sometimes Aunt Martha Does Dreadful Things. I think that's the title. Tenderness of the Wolves, and and also on the other side of it, if they weren't the bad guys, queer folk were often victims who then became victims again by the homophobic authorities, right? So there were a lot of them in the 80s. I guess that's why it strikes me, because I was watching horror in the 80s. Too Scared to Scream, Pieces, Cruising, of course, Butcher, Baker, Nightmare Maker, A Blade in the Dark, and City in Panic. Surprisingly, at that time, it was an actual movie specifically about gay men being killed. It is amazing that there have been gay horror directors right from the start. It's no wonder we've made Halloween into horror horde drag night for adults. F.W. Marnow did the original silent Nosferatu, which is actually a more faithful adaptation of the Stoker novel than the Bela Lugosi Dracula from a decade later. And we have to assume that the vampire in Salem's Lot, the original miniseries, was inspired by Nosferatu. And James Whale, he brought us the misunderstood Frankenstein monster. And he was presented as somewhat of a monster himself in Gods and Monsters. He was the old perv played by Ian McKellen, who feels up a young Brendan Fraser. The most prominent mainstream queer horror director in recent decades. I mean, it has to be Clive Barker. He's definitely the most mainstream, writes and directs, and he covers it all, and everybody knows him, I think, the most in the horror community. I would say drag is most infamous for being used as a catch-all for deviants like me. Essentially, it was used as a cautionary tale. The idea that insufficient love or excessive love from your mother, usually, always, could screw up your gender identity or your sexuality and turn you into a cross-dressing freak. Politics. Twitter made the horror community a little less fun with politics, while ripping Joe Bob Briggs a new one at the same time. So all I'm going to say is that I am fine with making and consuming horror strictly meant to scare, gross out, or entertain. But if anyone wants to dissect Ginger Dead Man versus Evil Bong to expose its deep political meaning, more power to them. I think those drag queens fighting back against police at the Stonewall Inn bar gave John Waters and Divine the guts to be multiple maniacs. I also think it may have given horror filmmakers license to make every cop too stupid to live in a horror movie. Queer horror is exploding in TV, movies, books, art. The queer horror community is craving it. And as long as the creators are queer, so the stories are authentic to our realities, queer characters are being embraced as the villain or the hero. There are loads of popular queer websites, podcasts, and blogs. But I do think we need to move beyond how queers were represented in the past and rereading those films as queer and start focusing on and supporting the genuine queer horror stories being told now. Movies alone in recent years, Bear Creek, Bloody Knuckles, Killer Unicorn, Pitchfork, Corbin Nash, The Dead Don't Die in Dallas, Dead Inside, Zombies of Mass Destruction has a gay couple as the lead, Dolly Deadly, The Getaway, Buck Wilds, God, there's so many of them. Stripperland, Chill, Condemned. I had a bloody good time at House Harker, awesome. President's Day, Feral. I could go on. The thing about violence against queers in horror is that because the genre is so male dominated, just as male hetero POV in horror makes females the victims and lesbianism is just porn for straight guys, it also revels in making gay men and trans women into bend over bitches. Um, for example, brutal anal sodomy is the threat in movies like Slew Hampshire, Father's Day, and Someone's Knocking at the Door. The Bi Guy in 2001 Maniacs is anally impaled, and that's a film by a gay horror director, no less. And a trans woman gets a brutal, gruesome, forced sex change in Gutterballs. Since boys, bears, and scares, and hairy asses, are my areas of expertise on my site, I've mostly interacted with gay male horror lovers like myself. But even they are a diverse group, from those who want their horror to be thought provoking and atmospheric, to those who just want to enjoy fun, cheap jump scares, gore, and hot homoerotic situations. I also find that many of us have found each other on social media, but we are physically all over the map and wish we could live closer to one another so we could have horror movie nights together all the time. Totally innocent, sex free horror nights. There's never any predicting where horror is going to take us next. I think there are two dams that need to be broken to move on to the next chapter of horror. First, there's the obsession with making movie throwbacks to 80s horror. I love my 80s horror. I basically get all the 80s horror throwback movies that I come across. But the problem is, not all of them are accurate. And I think that unless you were really there, you're just seeing what you're seeing on the film and you're not feeling the atmosphere of being in the 80s. So that's the one thing. And the next thing is zombies. We gotta stop with the zombies. The Walking Dead has covered it all. No matter what angle you're going for, The Walking Dead has it covered. Well, I'm grateful that younger fans are, embracing and appreciating classic groundbreaking horror. The biggest obstacle to moving forward, at least from what I see on social media, is that horror fans are watching the horror movies they loved as kids over and over and over again, in between watching the most recent big, theatrical, critically acclaimed release, rather than dipping into there are hordes of indies all over streaming services, and that's I focus mostly on that on my site. Um, and as for the future of queer horror, I'm thinking we are on a really good course. Just considering this film is being made, as long as we continue to support queer horror, but also we need more representation across our own community. Sites, podcasts, books, and movies made by every letter of the alphabet, of our alphabet, specifically for that letter.